Hello again, this time in the week when lockdown 2.0 has come into being. In March we had the first lockdown, the summer came, things eased, and we had moments when things almost seemed normal. And now we're back into lockdown with the knowledge that even with the great news that there may be a vaccine on its way, some kinds of restrictions will continue well into 2021. It's easy at the moment to feel discouraged. So it's a timely moment to remind ourselves that God is still in charge, that you can hold on to God's purposes and plans for you, even in the middle of this stormy time. I listened to a really helpful new wine talk this week, and I want to share with you some of the points from that because it was so good. But I'm also wanting to personalise it a bit for us at St George's. It was based on Acts 27. Which was Luke writing about being on a ship in an almighty storm that was going on. I was part of a quiz recently, and one of the questions was, have you ever fallen out of bed? Well, the only occasion I could think of was on a ship going across the Aegean, when I was tossed out of my bed in what was apparently a fairly mild storm. But it made me realise how the seas in that area, from the kind of Greek and Turkish mainlands right down to Crete and Malta, can be pretty perilous, and that's the area they're sailing through in Acts 27. So Luke records in verse 7, the wind was against us, it was becoming dangerous. Paul could see there was trouble ahead, and he tried to warn the ship's officers, but they took no notice. Then in verse 11, the wind dropped, so the sailors thought they could make it. Bit of a false sense of security set in. Maybe we've been through the summer thinking we can start to relax. But having a bit of false hope can make it feel even more discouraging when the storm springs up again. So now they start to go through a wind of typhoon strength, we're told. It's even worse. And we're told the sailors give up, all hope is gone. But Paul speaks to the men on the ship saying, keep up your courage. And that's something really important for us at this moment. These may be difficult days, but keep up your courage because God is still in charge. Paul says, I've been told by God not a single life will be lost. In other words, God's plan and purpose is still going ahead. The ship is going to be destroyed, you're going to have rough seas ahead, but God is still in charge. So from that chapter, a few things that might help us to continue to believe that God is at work despite the difficulties ahead. Firstly, keep with the plan. Verse 30, the sailors tried to abandon ship. Believe that God has a plan and stick with it. I would add to this, keep the main thing the main thing. And I think this is for us as individuals and as a church. Keep doing what God has called us to do. Stick with the plan, growing as disciples who make disciples in community together. Verse 33 on, Paul urges them all to eat in order to survive. And I remember the previous vicar of St George's, George Lings, coming back to preach quite a long time ago now, and he talked about the importance of each of us being self-feeding sheep. Chris is going to say a bit more about that in a minute, but it's a time to encourage yourself in God's word, in worship, in prayer, in fellowship, in community, wherever you can. Walking together in twos is still allowed, as is sitting on a bench together, socially distanced, even taking your own bit of bread and wine and giving thanks on a park bench. Be creative and encourage yourself as well as others. And then in verse 38, after eating, they lightened the load by throwing some of the cargo overboard. And this is a time like no other for lightening the load. Who cleared out a cupboard or two during the first lockdown? Abandoning things that are no longer needed and instead embracing those things that are life-giving. Maybe that means embracing new patterns. We've got a new month of prayer coming up. And might that encourage us to get into more helpful patterns as individuals and as households? Then in verse 39, it says, when daylight came, an encouragement that daylight will come. There will be a time on the other side of this storm. So let's hold on to that. However, when daylight came, they didn't recognise the land, but they saw a bay with a beach. People have spoken about the new normal, And through this time, it appears God is leading us into a place that might look very different to what we left behind in terms of church and even the society we live in. Whatever it looks like, it's probably going to be different and we might not recognise it. However, they saw the bay with the beach and they knew that was where they needed to be headed. God will be there pointing us to the next steps that are part of his purpose and his plan. So, keep going. Take courage and stick with the plan. Know that God is working his purposes out even in the middle of this storm. Eat so you'll survive. Be prepared for the different place we're heading to, but let's also be tuned in to hear the next steps to take. Thanks for everything that you're doing in this time, and know that Chris and myself and the team are praying for you. And that's the note to hand over to Chris.
Thanks, Sheila. The thing I want to think about a little bit is rhythms. It's a while since I've done any serious hill walking, but I remember as a young man backpacking, particularly in the Brecon Beacons, carrying a fairly heavy pack on my back and having to go up and down mountains. I say having to, I chose to do it. But I can remember that one of the things that kept me going when you were doing that sort of thing was to find the right rhythm. When you're hill walking with a pack on your back, you just need to find the speed at which you can go consistently, depending on the terrain and how hard you're pushing uphill or what have you. But just to keep a rhythm and keep going. And I've just been aware that with the burden of the lockdown, because it is a burden in different ways for different people, but it is, finding rhythms has been really important. Something about just putting one foot in front of the other and keeping going. And it reminded me of that lovely translation of Eugene Peterson's in The Message, where he speaks the words of Jesus. And this is Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. And he says this, "Are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace." Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Now, I was thinking there are rhythms in terms of all 3 points of the triangle. There are rhythms in terms of our worship and engagement with God. There are rhythms in terms of our life in community. There are rhythms in terms of our life seeking to share the goodness of God and the good news of Jesus with those around us. But I just want to focus on the rhythms of walking with God in our worship. This is partly prompted by a comment that one of our team made about the fact that they'd missed gathering or watching the Sunday morning live stream. And however much they planned to do it through the week, they never managed to find time for it. There was something about just having that regular slot in your diary that means it happens. I find just the same with my own prayers. There are 2 times when I find prayer difficult. One is when I'm busy and the other when I'm not busy. Different issue, still seems to be sometimes a struggle, unless I've got a regular pattern of meeting with God, which I hope most of the time I have. But just thinking about those rhythms in our worship, there are important rhythms for that corporate worship when we come together. There's something about coming all together for worship, that worshipping as a large group, which is really important. There's something about inspiration, there's something about identity, there's something about experiencing the presence of God as we come together. And as we've been putting out the live streams on a Sunday morning, we've been trying to continue with that. And that's why it's great to see people's names in the chat and to know that we're gathering together. But that's a really important rhythm. But it's not the only one. Because if we're thinking about the way that the New Testament church gathered together, building on the patterns of Jesus, there was the big gathered stuff. But then there was both the community-sized stuff, the extended family size stuff, and the very personal stuff. And I'm just thinking about rhythms for that. Rhythms about when we meet, whether that's online, as it probably is at the minute, or whether it's just something we do together at the same time with a missional community or some other group of people that you belong to. It's important to have that rhythm in place. And then there are the personal ones, whether that's like the group of guys in Open Table that I meet with about once a month just to pray with, because we also meet as a whole community once a month to pray and meet with God together. Or whether it's the times when Joy and I just get together as we wake up in the morning and use a set of Bible reading notes, or this week, as we're doing with a candle at the tea table, taking part in the month of prayer. But then there's the personal stuff, just me and God, or you and God, which needs to be a daily rhythm. And there's no excuse for not finding ways of doing that. Lots of apps on your phones or tablets these days. I like the Lectio 365 when I want to take a change. I've just started using a thing called Prayer Mate, which is helping me to keep my prayer list somewhere in order. There are lots of others. If you don't know them, just ask someone else what they might be using. So there are these rhythms of worship which are really important, and we need to pursue them like one foot after the other. But as we do that, I think just be aware of the two dimensions of doing that. And the first is simply laying ourselves before God and recognizing that He's God and we aren't, and that we can trust Him. There's something about the from me to Him dynamic which is important. And a lot of that is about thankfulness, just giving thanks. If you don't know how to pray, just start giving thanks. Think of things to thank God for, things that are blessings, things about Him, and particularly things about Jesus and who He says we are. That's one direction. And the other direction is just to receive fresh grace, to be continually open and receiving from the Holy Spirit. It might be that you want to do that by praying in tongues. It might be you want to do that by sitting in silence. It might be you want to do that by just putting a worship track on and sitting before God and just acknowledging that we need His grace and His power. So something there about rhythms of worship, all together, in community and on our own before God. And it's always important, but particularly now when things are perhaps more difficult and there's room for more discouragement, just one foot after the other. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it, says Jesus. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Bless you as you do that.